here's how our example is supposed to work. At the beginning of the system, or the program rather, we'll have a prompt that asks the user to enter a name. They'll type in something. And then based on what they type in, our output is going to change. All right? So if the user happens to enter a short name, less than 10 letters long, then what we're going to get is a display window that has a red background. On the other hand, if they happen to enter a name that has more than 10 letters, then we'll display a window that has a green background. So now you see how this behavior depends on conditions at runtime. And there's really no way for the programmer to account for all possibilities, right? Because we have no idea what the user's going to enter when they type things in. So the program has got to use an if statement to deal with the length of the name at runtime. And that's the whole point of the example. Okay, let's move on and see how we might design such a thing. Okay, now let's look at our design. Before we start, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the variables that we're going to need in order to make this program work. Basically, there's two of them. One of them is going to be a class variable named bColor, and that's going to represent the color of the background that we draw eventually in the draw method. Okay? That one's a class variable, which means it will declare it outside of any method so that it can be used in both setup and draw. Okay? On the other hand, there will be a variable named name that we use to store the name of the person, or the name that they enter after the dialog box is presented, and that can be local to the setup method. Okay, so it's always a good idea to think about variables as you're walking through this in order to know what data your program is going to be manipulating. In this case, a class variable for color and a local variable for the name. All right, so let's design our setup method. One of the things that we typically do in setup is we size our window. The problem doesn't really specifically state any particular size, but we'll just choose one when we implement it. And after that, what we need to do is we need to get the input from the user. So I'm going to abbreviate that and just say something like name equals user input. Okay, we know that we'll actually use a JOption pane dialog box in order to get that information in, but for right now we can abbreviate. We know how to do that. In code, we're just going to say that we have to do it in our design. All right, then we make a decision, almost. Let's take care of the default case first. That is, if the name is short, we're going to go ahead and set the color to red. So I'm going to set my background color to be red, and when we implement that, we'll see how that's done. And I'm going to go ahead and come over here to show the decision. Draw will be easy, so we don't need much space for it. Now we have to make our decision based on that background or that name. So if name length is greater than 10, that's the condition that we're going to use. And pardon my very messy diamond there. But if that's true, then what we have to do is set our background color to green. Otherwise, we don't have to do anything. So that'll be the end of our setup method. Okay? So just to clarify, set the size of the window, get the user's input, set the default background color to red, and then if that length of the name happens to be greater than 10, change the color to green. Okay? And that's the setup. In our draw method then, all we have to do is make a call to the background method that uses the color variable that we've set. And remember, that color variable that we use here in setup, here in setup, and here in draw has to be a class variable so that it can be accessed by both of those methods. On the other hand, name only occurs here in setup, so that can be local to setup. Okay? So there's the design for our simple little practice problem. Now let's go ahead and implement that. Okay, now we can start to implement this. Just a quick comment at the top. All right, now remember, anytime we want to do dialog-based input, we have to have an import statement for that. So that allows us to have access to the libraries where that exists. And also remember that we have a class variable in this design. That means we have to have a variable called bcolor that's declared outside of any method. Okay, so now we're going to have two methods, our setup method and our draw method. All right, and now we can go ahead and implement our design. In setup, we said that the first thing we were going to do is set our window size. So let's choose 300 by 300 for no particular reason. Then we're going to get our input. We're going to do that via the JOptionPane class. So JOptionPane show input dialog, and we'll give them a little prompt that says enter their name. Okay, then after that we said we were going to set the background color to its default color. Okay, and one way we can do that is with the color method. So the color method creates a color based on the RGB values that we send to it. Okay, so I'm going to use the color method to create red and store that in the bcolor class variable. And then we have our decision making, which we'll do with our if statement. So if name.length, and that's a method of the string class, is greater than 10, then what we have to do is change the value of that background color to green. Okay, and now I've created or finished my setup method. Draw is really simple. All we have to do is make a background call using that color variable. Okay, so let's test it and see how it works. Save it here first. So my name, I'll enter the short one first, and when the display window comes up, it's red. Now on the other hand, if we run it with a longer name, that's long enough that the display window is colored green. All right, well, there we go. Pretty simple, but nonetheless, it shows how the one-armed if statement works.